Hello, everyone. I'm Rania Khalek, and this is a special live episode of Dispatches. Israel's war on Lebanon has killed some 2,400 people, including over 100 paramedics. It's displaced 1.2 million people, including 400,000 children. And it's unleashed widespread destruction with U.S. supplied Israeli bombs dropped on civilian homes across Lebanon's cities and villages. Over 25% of the country is under Israeli eviction orders as Israel seeks to invade with the full backing of the US, which is convinced that Hezbollah is weak and about to collapse after several blows, including the assassination of its senior leadership. But after more than 2 weeks of attempted ground incursions, the Israelis are struggling to achieve their objectives. Having failed to make a dent in neutralizing Hezbollah, they're further than ever from securing their northern borders. Hezbollah, meanwhile, has regrouped, recalibrated its defenses, and is putting up a fierce fight. So, what's next? Can Israel achieve its objectives? Can Hezbollah protect the country from invasion and reoccupation? What about Gaza? And what might be the impact of regional escalation with Iran on these fronts? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by veteran war correspondent and analyst Elijah Magnier. Elijah, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for making the time. Your analysis is so important. So let's just jump right into it, because the last time I had you on was right after the Israelis had murdered Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, and they were doing a victory lap. It was a really devastating moment for the resistance axis. And I raised this before we get into the Lebanon situation, because yesterday we learned that the Israelis also murdered the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, and what turned out to be quite a significant way to go out. We saw the Israelis released video footage of his last moments that they took with a drone, showing him really fighting to the last breath. I mean, people are calling this guy a legend because of how he was, of how he fought to the last breath. But I'm just curious, before we get into Lebanon, could you talk a bit about the significance of Israel's murder of Yahya Sinwar, and what it means moving forward for the resistance in Gaza? And actually, I mean, I would say for people in the region who are looking at this man as basically a legendary figure.
But yeah, first of all, we need to understand how non-state actors function. Hamas has a decentralized leadership model. There are different branches that operate independently. Actually, we've seen Yahya Sinwar in Rafah, really close to the Egyptian borders. And then we see the Israeli with the whole division attacking Jabalia camp in the north of Gaza. And we see fighting happening in Gaza in the north, while Yahya Sinwar has been killed 2 days ago. So there is no connection between the leadership and the fighters, particularly when there is political and military wing, or even if the leaders is, in this case, responsible for both. So while Yahya Sinwar is indeed a significant figure, especially in Gaza, other commanders and decision makers can step in and continue the operation. This is what decentralized structure is, by ensuring when a leader is removed, the whole organization is not paralyzed and can continue functioning. And Hamas, like Hezbollah, has multiple layers of leadership. Therefore, you have the strip is divided in different parts, as the Israeli divided it with the Netzarim corridor in the middle, but then they are even dividing the north into half, so into two sides. And even there, you have leadership in every sector that acts completely independently from another. And then all the footage that the Israelis showed us about Yahya Sinwar made him really a legend, because they showed him living above the ground in a house. Secondly, in a military fatigue with bomb grenades and AK-47. So he was fighting. The Israeli told us today that he opened fire against the troop approaching, wounding severely one. He threw two grenades before they hit him with two shells of tanks and then a sniper and a drone, etc. So they really made him look like who he is, the person who fought to the last breath. Therefore, he uh, defeated them with his death. Why? Because he showed them that he is actually not with a captive, not surrounded by captives and protecting his life. On the contrary, completely isolated with only two operatives of Hamas. The leader of Hamas in Gaza had only two people with him. So all this narrative that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, was telling the world fell into the footage offered by the Israeli army and the information offered by the Israeli army. Therefore, Hamas is not going to be affected. Morally, yes, Sinwar is very highly respected, but let us look why Sinwar took the leadership of Hamas. Actually, he took the leadership of Hamas specifically because he knew he's going to be killed in Gaza. And he wanted a leader inside the strip, surrounded by the Israelis, in a closed stripe where nobody can come out, and subject to be killed every single day by bombardment or by a sniper or by a drone or by any other military way that the Israelis were conducting this war with. Therefore, he wanted to give a message to his people, not to the Israelis, because he couldn't care less about the Israelis. And to his people is that he's living like them, suffering in the same way, moving around like them, but he's not hiding in their tents. He's not hiding in the hospital. He's not hiding in UNRWA school. He is in a normal house. That is the message that Yahya Sinwar wanted to give, and he really won over Israel when Israel killed him.
It really is incredible to see the Israelis thinking that it will somehow make him look bad that he threw a stick at a drone while he literally had a hand blown off. I mean, he really fought to the end in a way that has, I mean, made him bigger than life. He already was bigger than life. He was the mastermind, they say, of October 7th. So this man is responsible for basically punching a huge hole in the idea that Israel is militarily impenetrable, because he showed on October 7th that Israel, you can penetrate Israel. And then beyond that, to go out the way he did, I mean, this is a 60-year-old man. This isn't some 25-year-old. He's a 60-year-old man on the battlefield, throwing grenades, using an AK, not surrounded by a bunch of human shields like we were told, underground, living lavishly somewhere else. I mean, that's how Israel's leaders behave. They live lavishly while they send their 20-year-olds to go die for imperialism. So it's quite a sight to see that last footage. I think it's going to have it is having the opposite impact that the Israelis think. And obviously this isn't the end of Hamas, because like you said, a figure like Yahya Sinwar knows this is how he's going to go out. He's not expecting to retire on a farm somewhere and play with his grandkids in a rocking chair. As I'm sure everybody would like that to be how their life ends in the situation where you're under occupation. That's, in colonialism, that's not, the hand you get dealt. But moving on to the Lebanon front, Elijah, I think the last few weeks have been quite revealing, because the last time I spoke to you, like I mentioned, Hassan Nasrallah had just been killed. The Israelis and Americans were convinced that Hezbollah is going to collapse. They've eliminated the entire senior leadership. But what we've seen since then is not a weakened organization, but an organization that's fighting fiercely, that appears to have regrouped and reorganized at a large scale, that's acknowledging maybe some past mistakes and recalibrating how they need to deal with the Israelis. And you have a forthcoming piece that I got to have a sneak peek of, so thank you for that. The title is Hezbollah Moves from Confusion to Control Lebanon's Invasion. And you write that Israel underestimated the distinct operational role and resilience of Hezbollah's military and special forces in southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley units. So how has Hezbollah, after facing such blows that would cripple almost any organization, managed to continue the fight. I mean, not only do we see them holding off an Israeli invasion, and we can talk about the details of that, but we also see them raining down missiles on Israeli cities, and even, accomplishing, getting a drone inside of an Israeli military base outside of Tel Aviv, and actually inflicting casualties at a military base most people in the area didn't know existed. So how did Hezbollah go from losing Hassan Nasrallah and its entire senior military leadership to showing that it's still a very powerful force?
If I may, I will answer this question, but I would like to go to Sinwar for only 2 minutes.
Please,
And
please.
I would like to invite people to watch the drone footage that the Israelis showed us that resume the entire history of the Palestinian struggle against the Israelis. And why I'm saying that, we have seen a Sinwar without his hand was cut off and laid on a divan, a drone coming toward him. And then he took with his left arm a piece of wood and throw it at the drone. The importance of this scene is this is the history of the Palestinians since 1948. Their arms have been cut. They are facing the most modern and powerful army in the Middle East and one of the powerful armies in the world. And the only thing that he found next to him is a piece of wood. And yet, wounded severely, he did not hesitate to take this piece of wood and throw it against the drone, even if he did not hit the drone. This is how the Palestinians struggle against the Israelis, with a stone when they had a stone, and with a piece of wood when they have a piece of wood, with the modern army. And yet they still throw this piece of wood, and they did not hesitate to challenge the Israelis. That is the history of Palestine in the image that we have seen with Sinwar in the last minutes before he was killed by the Israelis.
No, it's really important. I mean, this is literally his last moments. A drone comes in and he literally throws a stick at the drone. And I think it's really important in the sense that, somebody made this point, Elijah, and I thought it was a really compelling one. When Rifat al-Arir, the Palestinian writer that was murdered by the Israelis, assassinated by the Israelis in Gaza back in December of 2023, one of the last things he talked about when he was speaking to the Electronic Intifada is he said, I don't have weapons, but if the Israelis come into my classroom, I will throw my markers at them. I will fight them till the last breath. And so Yahya Sinwar throwing a stick at that drone really exemplified that spirit. And I don't know that it's unique to Palestinians. I mean, Palestinians have been forced into a corner where they have to fight to the last breath. I mean, their options are submit and die, or fight and die at this point. And so many of them are choosing to fight and die. But that said, I think any people who are subjected to this kind of depravity would fight for their survival in this way. And the bravest among them would fight until the last breath, the way that Yahya Sinwar did.
Yes. I will move to your question now. Yes, it is true that Hezbollah received a very strong hit when the Israelis blew up the pager, and they have wounded and killed around 3,000 people among Hezbollah fighters, medic personnel, people working in social support in different municipalities, etc. And yes, after that, they hit the Icon V-84 and created again some damage. And then they have killed many commanders of the top level, overseeing all the units. And then they killed the Secretary General of Hezbollah. But if we look at what the role of each one was doing, for example, the Secretary General of Hezbollah, Said Hassan Nasrallah, he was the representative of the party. He was not the one carrying the weapons in the south of Lebanon fighting the Israelis. He was conducting a psychological war. He was charismatic, loved by his people, and he offered his son and himself for his cause. But the people who are fighting in the south of Lebanon, the special forces, and those who are kind of infantry deployed in the south of Lebanon, never entered the battle for 11 and a half months. The only people who were engaged in the battle were the missile unit. And the missile unit were firing missiles and laser guided missiles against the Israelis. And that's it. There was no confrontation. So the entire structure of Hezbollah, special forces, and infantry is intact and is still now engaging with the Israeli invaders only because the Israelis tried to come into the Lebanon and they moved hundreds of meters or sometimes 1.5 kilometers, depending on the nearest village close to the borders, because now they're attacking from 4 axes. Therefore, the killing of the first line of command, these commanders were overseeing these units from Beirut. So they were responsible to make sure the function of these units is doing well, if they need logistics, to appoint commanders if ever they need to change one commander or to make shift or to supply missiles or ammunition or more men, etc. However, every single area in the south of Lebanon has a branch of the command and control, and there is a main branch in the south of Lebanon that oversees all these small command and control branches spread in dozens of villages in the south of Lebanon. These are intact. And the command and control center in Beirut that was hit by the Israelis when they assassinated Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was reconstructed, but in the meantime, the command and control center in the Bekaa Valley and the south of Lebanon they know their job. They know what to do. This is where the confusion between people saying, oh, Israel crippled Hezbollah. No, exactly the same as Hamas is a decentralized organization. And when there is a leader that is killed, another will replace him. And also the commanders in the military, they all subject to be killed. And they all can be replaced. And the job of the special forces to be able to do everything. To give you another information of what's happening today, there are a few hundred of the special forces that were sent to the south of Lebanon on the first security line. And the security line is the line that is in direct confrontation with the paratroopers Israeli that are trying to break into Lebanon. These people, when they go, they cut off all the contact with the command and control center. They go just to fight. They know what to do. They have enough ammunition. They have enough rockets and missiles. They know where they can dig into warehouses under the ground that they know the location, and they don't need to contact the command and go back to seek more instruction. They have their instructions. Prevent the Israelis from entering. And if they have to die, they will die in the battlefield. And they are the one who engage with the enemy before the enemy reached the first line of defense. And the Israelis have not reached the first line of defense yet. They still engage with these few hundred of the special forces since more than 3 weeks, and they have not managed to kill them all and to break on all fronts. And this is where we are at. It doesn't mean they're not going to break in. On the contrary, they have around 80,000 troops, but they are afraid to push the tanks and to fall into an ambush. And this is why they send the paratrooper first to clean the road for them. But then they will be faced with another dilemma, is to establish themselves in a static position where they will be subject to missile hit and laser guided missile. But that has not we're not there yet. We're still in the first phase of clashes between the paratrooper and Hezbollah special forces.
And it sounds like you think that we will get to that phase, which it seems like the Israelis are really taking their time. But I did see you questioning whether they actually wanted to or not, because perhaps they faced more fierce resistance than they did. But before you comment on that, I also wanted to ask you about this, because in your piece you write, despite fighting one of the strongest armies in the Middle East with over 80,000 troops, talking about the Israelis here, and around 1,000 tanks backed up by drones, air, and naval power, Hezbollah retains a tactical advantage in its knowledge of the local terrain and guerrilla warfare tactics. Now, I understand what you mean here, but I do think it's difficult for many people to wrap their head around how anyone can have an advantage over the manpower you described there. I mean, 80,000 Israeli troops stationed at the border is a lot of people. And it's more people actually than Israel had to invade Lebanon in 1982. Definitely, it's more people than they had in 2006. So obviously they've changed their strategy when it comes to dealing with Lebanon, because they know they're up against a fierce resistance. That's still a lot of people. And then on top of that, you mentioned all of these superior weaponry they have, naval, air power. The drones are a bit of a game changer here. I mean, just seeing that footage of Yahya Sinwar, the fact that the Israelis, they don't even have to come face to face with a wounded soldier they're fighting. They can just take a drone in to see what's happening before they go in, or just kill them off with a drone. So the surveillance and the destructive power of the drones makes a difference here. Yeah, so to go back to my original question there, is how can anybody have any sort of advantage over a vastly you know, I guess they're basically like outmanned. The Hezbollah is technically outmanned and out-equipped, if you will. So how can they have a tactical advantage?
The reason why I started by saying there are a few hundred special forces engaging with the Israeli paratroopers and making sure that they don't advance easily into the Lebanese territory is because the number is important. The larger the troop, the more casualties the Israeli will have. That's one. Two, the Israelis are saying the first phase is to go deep into 5 kilometers and control the whole area. We're talking about 5 kilometers per 100 kilometers. We're talking about 500 square kilometers in the south of Lebanon. Why that is important? Because when the Israelis are spread in these 500 square kilometers, Hezbollah's missiles north of the Litani River can reach every single position of the Israelis. The more troops there are, the more casualties they will have. And because the Israelis have been bombing Lebanon every single day with the Air Force, and every single day Hezbollah is firing between 200 and 300 missiles and rockets, it means that the Israelis are incapable of shutting down all the firepower that Hezbollah has. And we have not seen a decrease in firepower of Hezbollah in terms of missiles. Now, imagine these missiles are no longer falling on the northern area in Israel, but are falling on all the Israeli position in south of Lebanon. Then there will be more casualties because they are visible. The Hezbollah know exactly the location. The Israelis cannot hide themselves because the Hezbollah members are the owners of the ground. They are the owners of the land. They are part of these villages where the Israelis are, and they know how to reach them. So by being deployed in a hostile territory, by being visible and no longer hiding in the north of Israel in places where Hezbollah cannot see them fully, now this is in the advantage of Hezbollah to see the Israeli advancing in the south of Lebanon. And this is where they're going to suffer even more. So, of course, having 80,000, if we look at what happened in 2006, Hezbollah's capability in 2006 was much weaker than Hezbollah's capability today. And if the Israelis have destroyed the long-range missiles, which are above the ground, they did not destroy those under the ground. But let's forget about even these. let us look only about the missile that Hezbollah has been firing daily on Haifa and all the north of Israel. Hezbollah doesn't need more than that. Haifa, there are 1 million inhabitants, and Hezbollah has medium range missiles between 80 to 150 kilograms of explosive. That is enough to be fired on all the Israeli troops inside Lebanese territory along these 500 kilometers where the Israelis cannot hide. So the equation is very simple. Are the Israelis capable of sustaining so many casualties? And at the same time, Hezbollah is hitting the domestic front. If Hezbollah start, which Hezbollah said we're going to start a new phase, is when the Israelis will come into Lebanon, then hitting them on the Lebanese territory and behind the enemy line, that's going to be painful.
You know, there's also the aspect of this that changed in the last couple of weeks because the Israelis were hitting Beirut hard. They were hitting the southern suburb of Beirut, where they believe Hezbollah's base is, which has been largely emptied of people because of just how vicious those strikes were. They did a few hits in central Beirut, which really frightened the population. In the city in general. But the last week that has changed, and that was followed by Hezbollah firing many, many missiles at specifically Haifa. Then they had that drone attack that killed, I think, like somewhere between 4 to 8 Golani Brigade soldiers, as well as injuring dozens and dozens more last week. That I think took a lot of people by surprise. And they promised to do more of that if Israel kept on hitting Beirut. And the hits on Beirut, I mean, I want to be very cautious about how I say this, but they have, except for a couple of airstrikes a few days ago, they've largely subsided in the last week. And so I'm just curious, is there a new equation at play here? I know the Israelis leaked in their media that Biden had told the Israelis to stop hitting Beirut so hard. So perhaps that has something to do with it. But I can't help but notice that the reduction in strikes on Beirut seem to have happened at this, like, be correlated with Hezbollah, raining down missiles on Haifa.
It's not only that. First of all, Beirut and the Christian part of Lebanon, they not all of them with Hezbollah. On the contrary, there are many people against Hezbollah. Therefore, bombarding Beirut and the Christian area means bombarding the pro-Americans who are not really anti-Israelis. So the Americans don't want Israel to turn these people against Israel and against America, which is playing also in the favor of the refugees internally displaced from the Bekaa Valley, from the suburb of Beirut, and from the south of Lebanon. And because Hezbollah fired 3 ballistic missiles on Tel Aviv, and these ballistic missiles hit the ground, were not intercepted in the air, as the Israelis said, because we've seen footage of these missiles, then that also was a warning. And I think without any contact between the Israelis and Hezbollah, both sides have agreed that in the equation, hitting Haifa is part of the war. And it is tolerated by the Israelis as long as no civilians are hit. And Hezbollah is not hitting civilian targets. Since the beginning of the war, since the 8th of October, so more than a year, Hezbollah did not hit civilian targets. There were a few civilians as collateral damage killed in the process, but the Israelis killed much more civilians in Lebanon than Hezbollah. So for now, this is more or less tolerated. And this is where there is a kind of respect, only because the Israelis know that Hezbollah can hit civilians and can cause large damage that the Israeli government cannot accept. And the Israeli government will suffer if Hezbollah starts hitting civilians. But then Hezbollah will also has to accept that the Israelis will start killing civilians, and the Israelis have no problem in destroying all the schools and the internally displaced people in wherever they are seeking refuge, as they have done in Gaza. So the only thing that is stopping Israel from doing so is because they understand Hezbollah still has a capability. Had Israel knew that Hezbollah lost all the capability, they would destroy Lebanon as they have done in Gaza.
Right. And I think that's important to focus on. Real quick, before I move on to the next question here, I just want to remind people who are watching, there are over 2,000 of you watching, but only 500 have hit the like button. So please hit the like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. And also just have to always shout out that you can become a member of Breakthrough News and support our shows here by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member. Hit the like button, subscribe, share. All right, Elijah. So moving on from everything we've discussed, I want to talk a bit about the domestic front in Lebanon, because something else is happening as well. And that is, while Israel is trying to weaken the country, weaken Hezbollah specifically militarily, the Americans are trying to pressure the country politically. They are obsessed with the idea of the Lebanese appointing a president. Lebanon has not had a president for a couple of years. It has a caretaker government in power right now. The Americans want a president of their liking. They specifically have Joseph Aoun, the head of the Lebanese army, in mind as president. They feel like he would be a good, I guess, ally for them. And they feel that if they can appoint a president, they can somehow push Hezbollah out of government, which I think is a bit delusional. But all that's to say, they are pressuring for that. They see this as an opportunity to get their way in Lebanon in terms of the makeup of the government. They also recently, the UN Security Council, or at least the people who have the most power in it, seem to have adopted the U.S. position. There was a recent conversation that took place between Speaker of Parliament Nabi Berri and the UN representative to the UN Security Council representative to Lebanon, where he said to her, "Look, like we can't convene a session right now to even do what you guys are asking, because what if the Israelis assassinate the ministers of parliament they don't like? Because there's over a dozen Hezbollah members of parliament, because they were elected in democratic elections in 2022 to serve in parliament. They have served in the Lebanese government for several years now. So they're a part of the Lebanese makeup, the political makeup. They're a part of the Lebanese fabric. And her response to him was, "We can't guarantee Israel won't try to kill people." So it's like the Americans have a gun to the head of the people, like of the Lebanese government right now, trying to force regime change, essentially, in the midst of this catastrophic existential war and invasion. And on top of that, you have the stoking of civil war sentiments. You have that speech by Netanyahu last week to the Lebanese people saying, either you rise up and basically kill each other, or we will turn Lebanon into Gaza. So he was essentially saying, either you go to civil war, or we'll do to you what we've done to Gaza. You have the Americans pushing for this. You have the American allies on the ground and their media outlets like MTV stoking hatred for displaced people, trying to cause civil unrest. So I'm just curious on this particular front, the potential for civil war. I mean, Hezbollah is still powerful enough to fend off an invasion. Are they also powerful enough to potentially deal, if this continues for months and months on end, with civil unrest?
You're absolutely right in asking this question, which is very important. And in my article, I described it like Sheikh Naim Qassem, the Hezbollah Vice Secretary General, that gave the idea in which stage Hezbollah was and is today. In his first appearance, he looked weak, confused, sweating. The image was very bad, and he was just delivering some information, but not enough confidence. This is when the Americans jumped in, and the Israelis thought they have really created what they wanted by crippling Hezbollah, killing the Secretary General, the first line of command, destroying the warehouses, and they thought they've destroyed all the warehouses. And that was a golden opportunity to jump on Hezbollah. Sheikh Naim Qassem came out the second time. His position improved, but not enough. and he was talking from a better position, but yet not very convincing. But at the end of his speech, the military immediately started to launch missiles on Haifa, adopting Sheikh Naim Qasim as a vice secretary general, or if you want, the Abu Ubaidah of Hamas, it kind of the spokesperson of the organization. In his third appearance, he was confident, strong, threatening the Israelis, not sweating. The temperature was 28 degrees. He was staying in a place with air conditioning, obviously. He had the flag, the Lebanese flag and Hezbollah flag on his right-hand side. He was using his finger, like Sayyid Nasrallah, to threaten the Israelis. He was laid back and talking from a position of power. That position put an end to any idea of steering the pot inside Lebanon. In addition, we have seen daily 200 to 300 missiles and rockets. And we have seen the attack on Haifa and attack on the Golani barrack. All these are positions of strength telling the Lebanese, you have been pushed too early and you thought Hezbollah is weak and waiting to be completely destroyed. You are mistaken. And that message was well received because after that, we've seen a different position domestically in Lebanon. All these attempts to start eliminating Wafik Safa, for example, that was a domestic move. It was not an Israeli request. It was kind of American interest because Wafik Safa was the intermediate between Hezbollah and all the security forces and all the institution, the Lebanese institution. If you cut that link, then Hezbollah will be more confused. But only if Hezbollah was weak. But Hezbollah showed it's not weak. Hezbollah showed that all its infantry and special forces are intact. It shows for 3 weeks, 80,000 troops are not advancing as 80,000 troops should advance in a territory like the Lebanese territory where they have been so many times in the past. All that is a position of strength, and yet for Hezbollah, the battle has not started. And they still, every single day, launch 200 to 300 missiles and rockets on the Israelis. The message by the Israelis was wrong to the Lebanese citizens who thought they can jump on Hezbollah's head and cut its neck. And the Israelis again underestimated Hezbollah exactly like they have underestimated Iran when they bombed its consulate in Damascus. That was the wrong evaluation. And this is why today we do not hear the same voices rising in Lebanon like we heard them 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
They're
that's
much
true.
lower now. So killing the political bureau of Hezbollah or the members of the parliament will make no difference whatsoever because nothing in Lebanon is going to happen before a ceasefire.
So I want to ask you about a few more things here. And one is, okay, so we understand the Hezbollah side, what their capabilities are. Obviously, they were underestimated. On the Israeli side, they're obviously like patiently waiting, but it's actually unclear how far the Israelis are willing to go because they don't seem to have an end game. But what they are doing, as you've pointed out, is they're using this kind of scorched earth tactic, right? Where they just go in and kind of destroy everything. Like we saw them blow up an entire village a couple days ago. And obviously, this is how they operate. They are completely depraved, no morals, the most unethical army in the world, really. But there's also a strategy to this scorched earth method is they want to make these areas uninhabitable so Hezbollah can't hold them. And also make it easier for the Israelis to come in when they decide to actually, invade with their tanks. There's also things happening here in terms of what the Israelis want, right? They say they want to dismantle Hezbollah. They say they want to return their settlers to the north, which obviously they do want. But there's also some diplomatic mechanisms they're trying to force in their favor as they carry out these scorched earth tactics. So a couple things people are hearing about is this Resolution 1701. And 1701 is technically what ended the war in 2006, where Hezbollah is supposed to disarm and the Lebanese army is supposed to take over parts of the south, so it can't be a threat to Israel anymore. And so Israel's trying to get a more favorable version of this resolution. And I mean, it seems like Hezbollah is sort of going along with the idea of it to some degree. But I guess my question for you here is, what is Israel's objective? What is their end game? Do they actually have one? Because everyone keeps saying, oh no, Israel, risks ending up in some kind of war of attrition. But there must be some strategy on their part. They must know they can't actually reoccupy and hold South Lebanon without a lot of pain. I'm not sure they even really want to do that. No, not want is not the right word. I don't think they think they're capable of doing that. So what's the end game here for the Israelis, and what's their tactic going to be moving forward?
The Israelis, when they collected all the information about the locations of Hezbollah warehouses, officials, and commanders, this is when they started the sabotage. And then this is when they start destroying all these locations that they knew, even locations that were sanctions but had nothing, they were bombed. It means they had access to intelligence. And that was sorted out now. And only then they started the invasion of Lebanon, which means they were hoping that was enough to create chaos and destroy the leadership. It didn't happen this way. And at that time, Netanyahu set the objectives to answer your question. He said he wants to liberate the whole Middle East. He wants to change the Middle East. So for him, defeating Hezbollah, the next move was to bomb Damascus, kill President Assad, and move into Syria and occupy Damascus, which is part of the Israeli ideology that Damascus is part of the greater Israel. And then isolate Iran and start hitting Iran. That was the first objective. Now, when Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, realized that actually Hezbollah's infantry special forces is still intact and has not been damaged, and the operational room in the south of Lebanon is working and the missiles are fired on daily basis without any hesitation and without reducing the number, he changed the objective. And he said, I want the return of all the Israelis to the northern front. So what are the Israeli objectives today? They are very flexible. In 1982, Peace of the Galilee, the objective was to reach Sidon. Ariel Sharon saw the road open. He pushed the forces into Beirut. It all depends on the behavior and the strength of Hezbollah south of the Litani River. But it is impossible for the Israelis to take only the south of the Litani River, because they know the biggest part of the Hezbollah special forces, the Ridwan forces, are north of the Litani River. And to take that part, he needs to take part of the Bekaa Valley. This is why he has 5 divisions now. He has enlarged his presence on the borders, introducing Division 210 of the Golan Heights, the Division 98, Division 91, and then 98, and then 36 and 146. So he has 5 divisions from the Golan Heights to the Nakura on the coast. But that objective is possible only if he doesn't face resistance. And the way we are seeing Hezbollah today, as you said, he blew up entire neighborhood in the village of Hbaybib. That hill overseen the area that is controlled by Israel beyond the Lebanese borders. But on that hill, Israel will have to sit there, and this is where it's going to be subject to be bombed on daily basis. So they cannot stay. So if they take high ground, which are several positions in high ground in different parts along the 100 and 110 kilometers, which are very known because you just look at the map and you know where it is 900-meter hill, and you know that this is where the Israelis are going to sit. So it's very obvious where they are going to be deployed. So the objective of the Israelis are extremely flexible depending on the resistance they will face. But for the 1701, people talk about the 1701 as the disarmament of Hezbollah, as in the 1559, or that Hezbollah should not be present south of the Litani River, and that the Lebanese army needs to be deployed. But at the end of the 1701, there is a paragraph that nobody wants to read: the withdrawal of all the Israeli forces from the Lebanese territory, the respect of the Lebanese sovereignty, the non-violation of the Lebanese sovereignty. So what the Israelis wanted, they don't want the 1701 anymore. The Israeli wanted Hezbollah to pull away from the borders, north of the Litani River, the Lebanese army that can surrender whenever the Israeli ask the Lebanese army to surrender, because they asked the Lebanese army to pull back, and the Lebanese army pulled back. This is not an army. If the army cannot defend the territory, that is not an army. It is just a police force with a fatigue dress pretending to be an army to defend the country, when it is not equipped to defend the country with missiles, with tanks, or with any military power to stop the Israeli violation of the Lebanese airspace, land, and water. So today, the Israelis don't want the 1701 anymore. They don't want Hezbollah to be north of the Litani River, because Hezbollah has missiles that can reach Israel from north of the Litani River, or from the Uwali River on Sidon, or from the Bekaa Valley. The further you push Hezbollah, the larger the missile is going to be to hit Israel. Therefore, the Israelis want a new resolution. They don't want UNIFIL there. They don't want Hezbollah there. And they want to see if they can occupy part of Lebanon. Again, that will be decided in the battlefield. How Hezbollah is going to resist the Israelis, inflict severe pain on the Israelis, or let them go in, and then they would advance south of the Litani River, north of the Litani River, and then they will not leave. They will establish a buffer zone, and they will stay there. And this plan is very well known for everybody in Lebanon. So everything depends on the fighters that are south of the Litani River and north of the Litani River to decide the fate of the entire Middle East, of Lebanon, of Syria, because Syria would fall after immediately, of Iraq, and then of Iran.
Yeah, I was actually thinking to myself maybe like a month ago or 3 weeks ago, at the peak of Israel's barbarity over the last month in Lebanon, that I could absolutely see them trying to kill a head of state, because that's what the Israelis do, right? They try to push the envelope, and absolutely the one they would try first would be the Syrian president. And just since you raised the issue of the fact that how Hezbollah performs in the south, the entire security of the region hinges on that right now. And I want to ask you about the region, because there are other forces at play here. You have Iraq firing, you have the Iraqi resistance groups firing at Israel and making it past Israel's air defenses every few days. You have the Yemenis doing the same. They don't seem to really care if the Americans bomb them in response. Obviously, they're still stopping ships in the Red Sea. You have the U.S. bases in Syria that are, vulnerable to being fired at. They're kind of sitting ducks there. But you also have, I saw you say this in one of your tweets a few days ago, and I actually am curious if you can elaborate on it. You mentioned that there potentially are fighters from Iraq and Yemen who could end up in Lebanon fighting the Israelis if it reaches a certain point. So I guess my question is, and then you have this looming escalation with Iran. We're waiting for Israel's response to Iran, which they're coordinating with the United States. And the United States seems to be restraining the Israelis a little bit, that they sent these THAAD missiles to Israel. But I guess my question is, how does the rest of the region play into this? And how does this potential escalation with Iran impact the fronts in places like Gaza and Lebanon?
Honestly speaking, without being sounding a bit cynical, I think the exchange of fire between Israel and Iran helps Lebanon and helps them, because it is bringing Iran in the battle slowly but surely from a rightness position. So Iran cannot start opening fires and launching missiles on Israel without a reason. Now, Iran and Israel are even. Israel attacked the Iranian consulate. Iran retaliated. Israel killed Ismail Haniyeh, a guest to Iran in Tehran, and accepted the responsibility and paid the price. Iran retaliated. They are even. Now Israel is prepared to hit Iran, and Iran is going to hit back in a way that forces Israel to hit again, which is in the favor of Lebanon and in the favor of the region, because like that, Iran is dragged into the battle with its own will to make sure that it is not watching from afar. Even if Iran is supporting Hezbollah, the whole command and control center returned with the support of Iran. The refilling of missiles is happening with the direct support of Iran, regardless of the fact that Israel has bombed all the road between Syria and Lebanon, the main road, and they bombed not only Masna, but they bombed also the north, and they bombed dozens of roads there. But there are always ways to bring missiles in, and this is what's happening now under the nose of the Israelis. And this is why Hezbollah can sustain 300 missiles per day for a year, which means Hezbollah knows that in the stockpile, it has at least 100,000 missiles still, and that is replaced on a regular basis. So they cannot count on a stockpile that they have only. So by Iran coming into the battle in this way, it means that Israel will have to also respond and suffer the consequences of Iran part of this battle. And we have seen how 200 ballistic missiles, hypersonic missiles, were fired against Israel, and that pushed Israel now to think about hitting back Iran. That's one point. The second point is Iran brought to Syria tens of thousands of fighters from different parts of West Asia. People wonder, oh, Hezbollah doesn't need these fighters, it has enough men. That's true, but it doesn't have enough specialities of people who can launch drones and missiles on a regular basis, 24 hours, 7, when needed. But what's going to happen to Lebanon when tens of thousands of these fighters from different parts of the Middle East and West Asia will come to Lebanon? They're not going to leave. If this is what the Americans want, for Lebanon to be another hub where there are foreign fighters in it, this is what is going to happen if Israel has the intention to remain in Lebanon for longer than what it should, to be defeated and then pull back, or if Israel wants to cross the Litani River and go to the north of the Litani River. Then Hezbollah will need the help that it can get, because we're talking about a very vast territory and a topography that is very different from Gaza. Gaza is flat. Lebanon, you have all kinds of hills and forests and all kinds of a topography that is not easy for the Israeli to fight in. But it's also, even if Hezbollah knows the ground very well and the territory, because it's his land, then Hezbollah will do well with additional help, in particular if the Israeli push toward the Bekaa Valley and toward the Golan Heights and want to push on the Syrian front. For that, there is going to be a wider participation like in Syria.
Well, I mean, if I can't imagine the Americans necessarily want that, but they've demonstrated that they will green light almost anything except for maybe the Israelis hitting Iran's nuclear sites. But the last thing I want to ask you about here is there seems to be everyone's sort of kind of waiting to see what the results of the US election are before they figure out what their strategy is going to be next. And I guess by everyone, I mean really the Israelis, maybe. Perhaps they seem to be able to get away with whatever they want to get away with, but I'm sure that Netanyahu feels he'll have more wiggle room under Trump. Because that is his natural ally. And even if he gets whatever he wants from Harris Biden, he obviously still somehow doesn't like them because they're just not ideologically aligned, because the Likud party is basically an extension of the Republican Party. All that's to say, how important do you think the American elections are in determining the next phase of this war? Does it matter at all, or has it taken on a life of its own at this point, and it doesn't really matter who's in charge in the U.S.?
Well, we have seen there is no difference between Republican and Democrats in terms of the support to Israel. Nevertheless, we've heard some worrying remarks from Donald Trump saying that Israel is too small. He said it's too small, it needs to be enlarged. He made this gesture with his hands. Enlarging Israel tackles the dream of the greater Israel, and that fits perfectly well with Benjamin Netanyahu, with Bezalel Smotrich, the finance minister, and the security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and also the Israeli society that has become far right in its direction and thinking. Today, the Israeli society, generally speaking, is not different from the leadership who are ideologically going toward the extreme. Therefore, if the Israelis have the possibility to bomb Iran with the overt participation of the Americans, they will do it. And Donald Trump will do it. When he was not re-elected, he said, Netanyahu is a coward. I asked him to go and attack Iran, and he said no. So he will invite Netanyahu to do that again, but this time Netanyahu is very much willing to do it, to do anything to remain in power until October 2026, the time of the re-election in Israel. So the presence of Donald Trump, I think, is going to be harder on the Middle East than the re-election of the Republicans that are expert in double standard and hypocrisy, and they support Israel, but they're not asking the Israeli to enlarge the territory they are occupying.
Wow, it's really a scary time we're in. And I remember Hassan Nasrallah, one of his speeches, I want to say it was probably last December, because it was I think it was before the Israelis assassinated Salah al-Aruri in Beirut. He said something with reference to Gaza along the lines of, the international community is not here to protect us. There's no one here to protect us. The only thing that matters is power and weapons, and having power and weapons to fight back. And I think the last year has demonstrated that is absolutely true. And the only thing that Lebanon has as protection isn't the international community. It is not anything the Americans say or do to restrain the Israelis. In a way, you can say everything the Israelis always said about Arabs only understand force. It's actually true about them. They seem to only understand force. It seems to be the only thing that can actually deter them in any significant way. And, like you said, the future of this region at this point seems to really hinge on whether Israel is going to be able to take southern Lebanon or not. So everybody's just kind of patiently watching and waiting. And so I really appreciate you coming on, Elijah, to break all this down. I encourage everybody to check out Elijah on Twitter. Your website, your articles are excellent. And it's really important because We're just subjected to a tsunami of Israeli propaganda all the time. And if you're reading the Israeli press and the American press, you're getting the idea that like Israel's cakewalking into South Lebanon when that's absolutely untrue. Um, they're not cakewalking in. They haven't even walked in yet. So anyways, Elijah, are there any final words you want to leave us in before we close here?
Yes, thank you. I would like to say that the Israelis will not cross the Litani River and will not be able to remain in the south of Lebanon because they're not dealing with the 2006 Hezbollah. Hezbollah is more modernized today, has acquired a lot of war experience in different theater, and it's much more determined, particularly when we see the Israelis' behavior with the Palestinians. They've killed all the families of the Hamas and other Palestinian members of the resistance. They killed all the civilians, Hamas or non-Hamas. They've destroyed all the schools. They've destroyed the tent. They've destroyed the hospital. They took prisoners and they sodomized prisoners. We have never seen a soldier committing this atrocious act in jail and coming out hosted on television, received like a hero because he sodomized a Palestinian prisoner. After seeing all that, I think the fighters in the south of Lebanon will not allow them to cross the river. And I think they will do everything. We have seen how they behaved. This is not my wishful thinking. It comes from the observation of few hundred men only engaged in a battle with the largest troop, supported by air defense, by air force, by naval force, by artillery, by drones in modern warfare. The Israelis have everything they need, and they're not able to win quickly. They will go in, no doubt. But are they going to stay? If they stay, they will be killed wherever they stay, and they will return and they will regret having entered to Lebanon, because the Lebanese today, they have seen what the Israelis have done to their homes in the south of Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, in the suburb of Beirut, and they want to teach the Israeli a lesson.
Yeah, I think the world at this point wants to teach the Israelis a lesson, having to be subjected to all this horror on their social media screens. But Elijah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rania.